Hi, everybody, and thank you for joining us today for this webinar called Growing B2B Revenues from Edge, Which Services and How to Take to Market. So before we kick off with the content, I'll just give you guys a little bit of housekeeping for those of you who are not familiar with the platform. So as attendees, everybody is in listen-only mode, so you're automatically muted. If you need anything from us, I'm going to be moderating and managing the session today, so please do put any of your comments into the chat box and I'll be keeping an eye on that. Also, please feel free to put your questions into the question box throughout the session, and I will pick those up during the Q&A towards the end of the webinar. So as you think of them, you can put them through and I'll be keeping track of that. And lastly, we will be recording the session, and after the session is finished over the next couple of days, we will send out the slides and access to the recording if you want to watch it again or share it with any of your colleagues. So I think that ties up everything for the general housekeeping, and just introduce you to our panel for today and then hand over. So as you couldn't see me when I had longer hair, I'm Amy Cameron and I'm a senior analyst and I run our enterprise research stream at STL Partners. So I'll be here asking the tough questions. Then we have Dalia Adib. She's a principal consultant and leads our practice in edge computing, and she's going to be sharing some of her insights today. Alongside that, from STL Partners, we also have Miran Gilmore, and she's a consultant with us and has been working a lot in edge computing, so she's going to be sharing some insights today as well. And then finally, we've got Madison Long calling all the way in from Canada. He's VP of Products at CloudOps, and he's going to be sharing some of his experience in this area as well. So that's everybody today. And without further ado, I will hand over to the experts.
Thanks, Amy. So just to cover what we're going to talk through today, Amy's very kindly done our housekeeping for us. And then I'll start off by talking a bit about what we're seeing in terms of the current edge market and what we're seeing as operators' strategic ambitions with regards to the edge opportunity, specifically with the B2B opportunity. And then Dalia is going to be going into a bit more detail about the specific types of services that we've been seeing for edge monetization and what the strategies are there with regards to how telcos can go to market, the different types of customers they'll be working with and partnering with, and then finally talking about what the key considerations are that telcos have to think about if they're trying to succeed with these different types of services. And then Madsen is going to be talking us through a few different industry case studies that he's come across during his time at CloudOps, a few of the people he's worked with, and what he's learned from those different experiences. And throughout that, we'll also be having a few polls to gauge what your opinion is on a few different topics. And then we'll be finishing off with a Q&A so we can get a chance to talk to some of your questions. So we're actually going to be kicking off with a poll to start things off. So just trying to get a bit of an idea as to where you're at the moment in terms of your organization and your journey and how far you've come with developing your own B2B edge services. So the first option is for those people who are very much early on in this journey, haven't yet defined their strategy specifically, maybe open to exploring the edge opportunity, but haven't, set down any specific services. The second option is for those people who are quite early on in that stage of developing and they have done a few things. Maybe they've run some proof of concepts. They're starting to define what their proposition is and figure out, how they want to make money from this, but haven't actually gone to market yet. The third one is for those people who are a little bit further forwards in their journey, who, are looking to launch within the next year, but haven't quite got there yet. And then finally, it's those people who are racing ahead, who've already launched at least one B2B edge service, maybe more than one, and are a bit more established in terms of their edge journey and what they're looking to offer to customers. So I think
that poll for you, Miran, and we've got about 40% of people have voted so far. So maybe we'll give everyone a couple more seconds and then we'll close out.
Yeah. So just having the votes coming through, interesting to see how it's distributing. I feel like a lot of the early people voted quickly, and now things are balancing out across the people who are a little bit more developed in their services, but so far still a bit of a spread.
Are you happy for me to close out now?
Yeah, I think that's fine. Hopefully we've got everyone's votes in.
There we go.
Okay, so hopefully you can all see those poll results now. So yeah, as you can see, there's quite a big spread in terms of about a half of the people are still in their earlier stages. Maybe they've not yet begun developing their services, or they're very early stages of that. The majority, or not the majority, but the largest percentage of the vote are those people that are developing those services but haven't yet gotten them to market. And then actually a decent percentage, so about a fifth of the people have launched at least one B2B edge service. So it's interesting to know that, you know, all of these people, very different stages in the journey, but clearly still a lot of development to be done, and the market is still very young. And as we go through to talking about our research, essentially what we're looking to discuss in this webinar is based off a research program that we've been running, and we'll actually be releasing or publishing our report in November. And as part of this research, we've carried out an interview program, spoken to about 8 operators, primarily based across Europe, although there were some, spoke to a couple in North America and Asia, but primarily Europe, which is why, as you'll see some quotes throughout, we've not done a company title for each one, because the company was basically just European telco for all of them. And we wanted to understand how they're viewing the edge opportunity, and more specifically how they're looking to monetize edge and what their ambitions are in terms of the B2B market and the types of products and services they're interested in offering there. And on the whole, we found that telcos are really seeing the edge as a key opportunity for them to be able to move beyond their role as a traditional connectivity provider and offer some differentiated value. So, you know, a lot of them did say that they do think that this is something that they can differentiate with, and they are actively in discussions with enterprises. And as we can see from the poll results, although there were about a quarter of people who haven't quite gotten there yet, you know, most people are starting to shape their strategies with regards to their edge solutions and their edge services. And also a lot of people felt that 5G was going to be something that helps to drive that demand for the edge, because the two technologies go quite hand in hand with each other. And as 5G becomes, or as the rollout continues, there might be more demand for those edge services. But ultimately, the market is still very young, and telcos are still very reluctant to define fully what their edge strategies are. There's still a few people who said that they aren't quite clear on what the business case will be, on what they can offer from a commercial standpoint. They also weren't sure how the market was going to evolve over time, who the key customers are. So there was a lot of reluctance to say, you know, this is what we're doing and this is what we're going to stick with going forwards. And people were very much like, oh, this is our general plan and ambition over the coming years, but we're not quite ready to, you know, pin that down and commit to anything yet. Still very early days. And as I said, with 5G potentially being a bit of a catalyst, 5G is still not a very prevalent technology. So there could be a good few years before that's more widespread, and that has the impact on the edge demand. And when it comes to telcos defining their edge strategies going forwards, one of the key things we get asked a lot is whether the telcos should be partnering with the hyperscalers to develop this. And of the 8 that we spoke to, the vast majority are either currently partnering with the hyperscalers, or they are open to partnering with them in the future. And the reason that they are generally very open to partnering with them is because the hypers do have a lot of strengths to offer, in terms of they have these very strong developer platforms and good relationships with the developers. And there's also the fact that the edge is somewhat an extension of the cloud. And so the hyperscalers have this huge existing market share there. And although in theory it should be easy to be able to, you know, move across different cloud providers and migrate those workloads, the reality is that it's quite inflexible. And so a lot of enterprises want to stick with the same public cloud provider that they've got for their edge solutions, as well as for their cloud. And the hyperscalers also have a lot of great advanced capabilities, including their strong AI and analytics capabilities, and that's something that's particularly useful for developing a lot of different edge applications. Plus they have good developer tools, they're strong in blockchain. So on the whole, there's a lot of value to be gained from partnering with the hyperscalers. But obviously they're not perfect. They can't meet all of enterprises' needs. And some enterprises have specific requirements or applications that mean that maybe they don't want to use the public cloud providers. Part of this could be because there's a perception that the public cloud's risky from a data security point of view, or it could just be that the hyperscalers don't have an offering a particular company or a country, sorry. Or it could be that the hyperscalers don't have a sufficient level of the in-depth industry knowledge, which is why the hyperscalers often have to rely on the third parties like the SIs or the solutions providers to be able to actually take their solution to the enterprises. And finally, there's the fact that the hyperscalers focus is very much on the compute and storage side of things, and so they don't have the network capabilities that the telcos do. And so that's why the telcos can help to fill in some of those gaps on the network side and help to complement the hyperscalers offering so that they can partner in a way that's synergistic and caters to what the enterprises want and benefits both parties. And in terms of where we're seeing the edge opportunity being, we often talk about, the telco edge as being anything that spans from the enterprise to the core network, and we talk about telco strategies with regards to edge as being, we call it like a blanket term. We just talk about the telco edge, but actually through our discussions, it became very apparent that the telcos are viewing the on-prem and the network edge opportunities quite separately. So in the short term, they're seeing the on-premise edge as being a much easier opportunity to address. And this is where a lot of the telcos are placing their focus at the moment, because they see this as being a more achievable goal. It's a good way for them to get their foot in the door to offer some kind of an edge. That's because the infrastructure is a lot simpler to deploy. Maybe they're piggybacking off an on-premise data center, or they're literally just installing a few racks on the customer premises. But in each case, it's going to be a very small scale deployment. Whereas in comparison, the network edge is a much larger thing to scale out and deploy. And here it's much more early days, so it's not so clear what's happening in the market. And it does just take a lot longer to roll out because the time it takes to, upgrade your entire network so you have the suitable infrastructure to offer the edge, it's just a big task, and you do need the scale for it to be valuable, and that does just take more time. But the advantage here and why it's attractive to the telcos here is because you can create those much more horizontal services. So whereas with the on-prem edge, you're having to do often a lot of different one-off deployments, they have to be tailored to each individual customer's requirements. With your network edge, it's a bit more akin to the cloud in that you can offer a more generalized offering and a generalized set of services that are suitable to a lot of customers, and you don't have that same need for customization each time. And although this is an opportunity that's slightly longer term, and I think one of the people we spoke to said that he sees the on-prem edge as being within the next 2 years, whereas the network edge is sort of 2+ years. It is an attractive one, and a lot of the telcos still do have ambitions there. And as I said earlier, they're seeing 5G as a technology that will act as a bit of a catalyst for demand here. Sorry, I forgot to click through to those quotes, but yeah, basically backing up the fact that they're looking to offer these more neutral services, and they do see that 5G being a bit of a booster for this. So in terms of the strategic goals that they see Edge as offering, we obviously know that the telecoms industry is under a lot of pressure to transform because telcos, as in their role as the traditional connectivity providers, are finding that their revenues are diminishing, and so they're looking for these new sources of growth. And we generally found that the telcos are seeing the role of Edge in growing their business in 3 different ways. So firstly, a lot of the telcos we spoke to expressed that they're seeing Edge as a way to move up the value chain and go beyond their traditional position as just the connectivity provider. And particularly quite a few of the telcos we spoke to said that they have this ambition to become a one-stop shop. So they want to be the one vendor that their customers can go to meet all of their telecoms and IT and networking needs. And so they really want to grow the position that they hold within the ecosystem and become a much more relevant player there. And by doing this, they're going to be increasing their presence in the value chain and therefore increasing the average revenue per account. And generally the types of operators that we saw going for this style of strategy is the ones who have the strong relationships with the enterprises, and they've started to build those relationships and capabilities, so it's easier for them to extend their edge services towards that. The second type of people we saw is the telcos who are looking to extend their network services, so essentially extending what their core business is. So it's about meeting the demand for the more premium network services, whether that be for better latency or reliability, and by upgrading their networks to offer these more premium services, there's potential for greater revenues. And there's also just the fact that the network is physically going to be expanding in terms of there being more edges across the network, and each of these network edges will need to connect to the cloud, and even within your on-premise deployments, you could have multiple edges, and all of these need to connect to various devices. So there's just a lot more routes for telcos to be providing services for, and therefore, each route acts as an additional revenue opportunity that the enterprise has to pay for. And so generally the types of operators we saw going for this are the ones who have those established network services businesses and really want to stick to what they know and stay true to their core competencies. And then finally, there was also Edge provides value to some people in terms of it giving an opportunity to enter new markets. So if they want to develop a B2B proposition in new markets that they don't currently have that enterprise business in, Edge can be a good opportunity to do that, whether that be in a different country or if it be for targeting a new customer base. So one of the people we spoke to said that they're looking to target the developers as a customer, not just a partner with their Edge solutions. And generally the people going for this are the ones who don't have the strong enterprise businesses and want to be able to develop those and see Edge as the route to doing that. So I'm now going to pass over to Dalia to talk in a bit more depth about the actual types of B2B services that we've been seeing.
Thanks, Naren. So I think broadly speaking, partly from the interview program and just our general observations, speaking to telcos fairly frequently on what they're doing in Edge, we found that there's 5 sort of service areas that telcos are developing to serve these B2B customers with Edge-enabled services. The first thing is like what Miriam was saying, there's this group who are really focused on the core business, and although do not see Edge as maybe or do not really feel that their role as a telco should be around moving beyond the value chain. It's really about doing what they know best better. But there are still opportunities, and to be honest, Miriam's already kind of talked through some of them, like the fact that there are Edge is distributed by nature, and that distributes the number of routes and the connectivity sort of requirements that are needed to connect between devices and edges and other edges and clouds, or private or public. I guess the other thing that's happening though, that we heard from the telcos on this edge to cloud networking, and it's very early days, but there is this future sort of desire and again ambition that edge to cloud networking needs to become more automated, need to be able to leverage sort of AI and analytics more effectively, to be able to manage networks to meet application requirements, depending on, I guess, what the status of the network is. So having almost integrating more network awareness into the applications directly. So that's one thing that came out. And then broadly speaking, it's about sort of incorporating automation more when it comes to sort of existing services, which could be extended to include edge computing. So things like SD-WAN and SD-LAN, Cloud Connect, all of these can be enhanced if telcos can leverage more analytics and automation, and I guess be a little bit more in some ways sophisticated with how these services are delivered, and take some more of that headache almost off the customer's hands. The second thing, so this is sort of like moving up the value chain a bit. The next 2 are around, I guess, looking at sort of the compute and storage infrastructure. So not just looking at connectivity. And these are a little bit divided, what we've seen between, as Miriam was saying, the on-prem edge and the network edge, where in the on-prem edge, the service or solution area is this kind of private edge infrastructure, where the service is essentially around providing the network services, but also the hardware and software infrastructure to allow the enterprise to run applications on top of. And in most cases, the sort of the opportunity, at least the go-to-market opportunity for telcos, is to couple this with some kind of private mobile network, private LTE/private 5G offering. And so they really see that as a hook for enterprises to be interested in their edge compute, their sort of on-prem edge compute offering. And also, it kind of increases the telco's right to play in that domain and enter, and go beyond just connectivity, moving into sort of compute and storage. And there are, there's obviously synergies where you, as you deploy private networks using some kind of edge infrastructure anyway, those same boxes essentially can be used to host third-party applications as well as the sort of the private network functions. On the network edge side, this is quite a different play, because with private edge, it's single tenanted infrastructure. You have one customer, you have one bit of kit for one customer, and the commercial model is very different to, say, a network edge platform, where really this is, I guess, extending or providing a cloud-like platform at the network edge, which could be more like a distributed cloud platform. So it doesn't necessarily just have to be a way to provide access to, say, developers and enterprises to access storage and compute resources at the network edge. It could be across the cloud as well. And this is, these could be infrastructure as a service platforms, but some of the telcos you spoke to also talked about potentially focusing or providing a kind of platform as a service offering where they may specialize in certain domains, which could be industry specific. So, for example, you could, as a telco, provide a sort of maybe a gaming sort of platform to help gaming developers build applications or put their gaming workloads at the network edge to take advantage of the, the low latency and the capabilities it brings. Next one is a little bit, I guess, moving into sort of the application enablement layer. And this, these aren't necessarily mutually exclusive. Often telcos are doing more than one of these, but there's, in some cases, telcos are increasingly moving towards providing services on top of cloud. So, let's say very few telcos offer their own public cloud today. There are some who offer private cloud, but in a lot of cases they are, reselling public cloud and providing the services on top. And one of the key, I guess, services that enterprises demand is the ability to manage applications and workloads and the infrastructure, which may be across different clouds and different cloud providers, and as we move to the edge, across different edges as well. And obviously, as the edge is a more fragmented space, that becomes increasingly more complicated for an enterprise to orchestrate and to manage. And so creating that layer to take away some of the challenges there is key. And we've heard, quite a lot through some of our enterprise research programs, that is increasingly becoming a challenge, especially as things like data sovereignty and data privacy laws become more localized. At the moment, this sort of the tools to allow enterprises to manage data is quite manual. So they will have to migrate applications to different data centers in different countries at some point to comply with local laws. Being able to do this more dynamically in a more kind of cloud native ways is kind of beneficial for them. And then the last bracket, which we'll go into in a bit more detail, is a little bit to Miriam's point around this desire to be a one-stop shop, and it's moving really up the value chain and providing being that vertical solution provider where the enterprise goes to the telco for basically all the full edge enabled solution and service. So on the next slide, I go into this a little bit more detail to show you what that looks like. But first off, before I get carried away, I just wanted to get a sense of where telcos, and I guess we've got some telco partners on the call today. So where you feel that telcos should focus on if they are to grow revenues from edge. Is it really, I guess, is it buckling down or knuckling down, whatever the saying is, and doing what they do best and sticking to networking and really being able to provide better services, especially, I guess, as the edge applications are, latency sensitive. There are new SLAs that need to be met. Enhanced services need to be brought to the table. Is it around, kind of compute and storage infrastructure, moving into that domain, whether it be on-prem with private edge and coupling that with private mobile networks, or at the network edge through platforms? or is it sort of the last two services, one around multi-edge and cloud orchestration, being a kind of a neutral, I guess, cloud partner for enterprises, and being and allowing them to and I guess creating a sort of a horizontal service, but allowing enterprises to manage those workloads across different edges and clouds? Or is it really that they should be seeing edge as a way to truly move up the value chain and provide solutions to specific verticals? So yeah, I think I can see, yes, I can see things coming. So I think we've got 60% of the group voting, so keep them coming.
I guess we'll give everyone just a few more seconds before we close out then.
Good stuff. Okay, so these are the scores on the doors. You know, another, I guess, maybe a good question from us, because it splits the vote. So it seems that, you know, there's different views here. I guess the one thing is that, you know, clearly Edge is about allowing telcos to do something different, to move into different spaces. And there is a bit of a split between, you know, whether it's moving into a horizontal space, looking at infrastructure, platforms, multi-cloud, but there are also those who are looking at vertical solutions. So that's good that there is some, you know, some interest and appetite for vertical solutions, because my next couple of slides are about that. So at least what we heard with some of the telecoms operators that we spoke to is that they were, you know, they are keen on becoming this vertical solution provider. So I just wanted to touch on, I guess, what that means. And it's really about, you know, moving up the value chain and providing in some cases, you know, providing new services in the telco core domain within the connectivity layer. So as I mentioned, you know, private 5G, private LTE is really I guess a bit of a key to unlock this opportunity. At least that's kind of what the telcos are seeing. But it's also providing some of that infrastructure, and particularly the edge is quite, you know, as I keep saying, it's very heterogeneous. And at the moment it's quite early. So whether you're looking at, especially at I would say at the on-premise edge, that edge can be, you know, it could be you know, in some cases telcos think about a universal CPE box being the edge, and changing. And, you know, I guess there's a clear way in as a telco, because you already have that customer premise equipment for the networking services on site today. You know, in some cases about providing some kind of on-premise mini data center, or even a sort of, you know, a small box environment, or it can be some of, you know, hyperscaler or third-party edge solutions as well, obviously. So it's really this, I mean, this vertical solution is really about bringing that with the cloud, with the services on top, and in some cases trying to, I guess, leverage existing capabilities, whether it's, you know, IoT platforms that telcos already have in-house or through partnerships, analytics platforms which telcos are building up, and then the applications themselves, and taking them to the customer. So obviously here we've kind of taken, I guess, manufacturing as an example industry, where these are some of the applications that we heard. And it wasn't just manufacturing. So in terms of some of the use cases we heard, I mean, this is just a very small, you know, sample set, but we heard use cases that were being explored to deliver these vertical solutions from, you know, from manufacturing and providing, you know, augmented reality solutions for maintenance workers, through to fisheries and being able and helping fisheries to automate, through to kind of improving customer analytics in the retail space. So yeah, so, you know, I guess this is a little bit where they saw the big opportunity, and also, you know, there's that last layer, providing the managed services on top, which again, kind of telcos see as a little bit of their sweet spot, where they, you know, they can provide those, whether it's one bill or the contact center, you know, the services, operations, management, security, all these things on top of all these different components underneath it. So, I mean, the thing with the vertical solutions play, it's, I would say it is obviously quite ambitious, quite different to what most telcos do today. And some of the factors that came out that would be critical for success, first thing is on the technology side. So we heard a bit about, you know, this need to move to adopt cloud native networking and IT skills. And, you know, one of the reasons for that is to be able to really leverage the network more effectively and bring it closer to the applications and to the compute infrastructure, and have you know, all these parts talk to one another more effectively. If they're using the same tools, they're more likely to be able to do that. I think we heard from one of the telcos that they were really making a big effort in this space. So they'd recruited, I think, 6,500 experts. And part of that is, it's to make a solution that works well. But the second thing is also to scale vertical solutions more easily. So, the telco doesn't want to have to build to each industry or even each customer. You want it to be, relatively scalable and have a sort of horizontal platform and, build easily on top. And, if it's being built on cloud native tools, it makes it much easier to do that and makes it easier for the customer to adopt it and manage it as well. And then some of the other factors that came up were a little bit more on the commercial side. So we heard things like, there's this demand to be from enterprises that they want solutions, but they want to move to as a service models and be able to pay over time and not have to pay huge fees up front and minimize their risk and to some degree over time as well. And so it's really about bringing, I guess, the models, the commercial models that have been so successful in the cloud to and in this case mainly an on-premise environment as well, whereas and moving away from them having to invest in all that the capex and the infrastructure from day one. The other thing, I guess, that we had that telcos want to do is not think about this as, there's all these components and we price cost plus, but we actually want to think about what is the value that this is unlocking to the end customer. And again, that business case is quite different industry to industry. Sometimes it's about automation, improving efficiencies. In other cases, it might be around improving health and safety in the environment, or it could be around, increasing revenues by engaging customers more effectively, like in the retail space. So understanding, from a dollar amount, what that means is important so that telcos can therefore price based on value as well. And I think just the last thing that I wanted to touch on is some of the factors that telcos should think about to determine how ready they were in building and delivering and taking these services to market, because they are different in nature, and hopefully have sort of pointed out some of their differences. But I guess here's a little framework to take you through this in a bit more detail, and we've kind of, I guess, provided our view of how ready telcos were on an average basis. So it's slightly different for each telco. First thing is, it's a kind of external to some degree factor, which is a type of edge. And it sort of goes without saying, and again, Miriam touched on this, that the network edge is more nascent, and the nature of the application. So especially if, some of your customers who could be developers providing consumer applications or building consumer applications, they really need a network edge that scales, and that their customers can get the, say, low latency benefits no matter what network they're on or where they are in the world. And until there is some evidence that network edges will scale, then you have that chicken and egg problem to start with. Whereas the on-prem edge is, it's a little bit more here and now, although, it is fragmented, and some of these decisions around, which vendor do we work with to provide even the box is something that telcos will have to consider, and can be quite bespoke depending on, again, which customer, which industry that you work with. Second thing, I guess that telcos need to consider is a little bit of the customer base. So, some of the services are a little bit trickier are, again, the network edge platforms, because your customer base might be developers who, they were the first customers of the cloud. They are always the, early adopters, and they're the ones who want to innovate. And that's not the telco's traditional enterprise sort of customer base. So that, for telcos who want to target that group, that's a consideration to make. How do you build that up? But equally, on the private edge infrastructure and the vertical solution side, it may be that the nature of your customer within the enterprise is slightly different, because here, now as we move, or the real benefits of edge in some cases about changing how an enterprise operates their core processes, say in manufacturing, for example. And so, some of the key stakeholders there are the operations team, or those who head up a sort of a line in business, and that's a slightly different group to what telcos are used to, because it's not the sort of traditional IT technology group. So again, another consideration that telcos need to make when they take the service to market. Third thing is about the go-to-market and a little bit on the channels more. Again, looking at vertical solutions and private edge infrastructure in particular, there is a little bit more of a need to go for a kind of consultative sale and to really understand the customer's requirements, because it's not as simple as, we need edge infrastructure. There needs to be some education on how it's used. But even if they are somewhat aware of the benefits of edge, the telco will need to understand things like which applications, or be able to listen to the customer and therefore recommend the applications on top to be able to provide those vertical solutions, and how they'll architect the edge and how it will interact with the cloud, all that sort of thing. On the network edge platform side, because these are a little bit, for this to work, you need to be able to provide sort of cloud-like platforms and more of a marketplace, self-serve environment. That's what developers are used to. Something that, to some degree, telcos, not all telcos, but telcos have struggled with in the past, and to do that effectively. So, that's just another consideration. And then the last thing, which is a pretty big bucket, is technology. So I think some of the key, we've talked about some of the key things, this need for kind of using cloud native as much as possible, probably across all of these different services. But, in particular, again, when you look at network edge platforms and vertical solutions, there's a need to be closer to the application. That requires new capabilities for the telecoms operators. So it's things like, maybe building in analytics developer tools into the network edge platforms. On the vertical solution side, it's being able to actually develop and/or partner with others to provide the end applications in particular. So just to round things off, I guess some of the main takeaways from my side, I think for telcos who are building B2B edge services, one thing is to, and it's probably fairly obvious, but to prioritize the services, to understand whether you want to go for a maybe more horizontal approach versus a vertical approach. And then if you are going to go for a sort of vertical solutions play, it's probably likely that you'll need to focus on, say, 1 to 2 industries to start with, to be able to build up capabilities, skills, relationships in a way that focuses effort, and you're able to invest enough resources and time to that industry vertical. Second thing, partners. There are some gaps in capabilities, in sort of go-to-market capabilities as well, not just technology and sort of solution delivery capabilities. So, understanding where partners can help you to take solutions to market will be key. And then working closely with customers kind of goes without saying, because edge is so nascent. It's still not, the customers don't know why they need edge. In some cases, they don't even know what edge is still. And so playing a key role in educating customers, and then sort of co-developing solutions, at least to start with, is going to be key to ensure that you create something that is valuable and is scalable in the long run. Okay, I think that's my bit done. I think I've gone over time. So sorry, Madison, I've probably squeezed your time a bit.
It's all good. So thank you, Amy, Miran, and Dalia. This is really interesting research. And while the edge computing market is certainly early in its maturity level, I know that we at CloudOps are keen to see how this market is going to mature. We've seen a number of interesting mission-critical problems that have led to early adoption of localized and edge computing by the enterprises we work with. And I'm going to give you a few examples of that. Do you want to click to the first slide? Perfect, thank you. So for the first example, we are working with an international gaming company that has a distributed workforce across the world, but especially including game studios in Montreal, Canada. And they came to us with a really mission-critical problem to solve this year, revolving around latency. Given the requirement to work from home, their workforce, like many others, have been challenged by the lack of access to the infrastructure and desktops that they had in their physical office spaces. And so in the interim, they've been using a virtual desktop service with the control plane hosted by their vendor in the United States. But the problem was that their team of teams, and specifically the game testers, required a much better latency and performance than they were getting from their virtual desktops to be able to do their best work. And so when we engaged with them, we first looked at the hyperscale cloud providers they were already leveraging for other cloud services to see if there was a more performant option, could we add GPUs or something like that? And while this service was available in the United States, it was actually not yet available in Canada. And so what we decided to do was we decided to bring the workloads much closer to the users, the game developers, the game testers at these Montreal studios. And so we adapted their virtual desktop control plane to actually run on a Canadian cloud provider that had several data centers clustered together in Montreal and offered GPU support for these types of virtual desktops. And the result is that we managed to take the latency down from what was, over 50 to 100 milliseconds and sometimes over 100 milliseconds to between 50 to 30 milliseconds, which actually allowed their game developers and testers to get back to doing what they do best, ensuring gamers like myself enjoy a bug-free gaming environment. And given that we leverage this kind of multi-tenant edge cloud resources to support the end user computing needs of this enterprise, it's just one great example of a use case that telcos can enable within their local markets via these types of network edge platforms and vertical offerings that you can build on top of these edge platforms that you folks were speaking about earlier in our webinar. The second use case is with an American climate change research institution that was looking to process really large sets of climate simulation and satellite image data in the cloud. They had been using a mixture of on-premise and hyperscale cloud infrastructure, and they really wanted to optimize their computing costs and standardize how and where they were processing and storing their data. And so we helped them do kind of a business and technical analysis of the various options. And for a variety of reasons, they chose to do their data analysis and processing on a hyperscale cloud, but they also wanted this secure and private connection to a Canadian cloud provider where they would actually store their data at a more cost-effective rate. And so this allowed the researchers to work more efficiently with a standardized data processing pipeline and have their cloud computing costs essentially optimized because they had the storage in the Canadian cloud, but were using elastic compute from a hyperscale cloud. And if we go back to the types of B2B services that telcos are considering monetizing, this is a great example of the kind of multi-cloud orchestration and multi-cloud networking that can enable these types of organizations to be able to seamlessly consume the best of breed services from two different cloud providers, depending on their needs. And the final use case, if you can flip to the next slide. Yeah, perfect. That I'm going to speak about is actually with the Canadian healthcare institution. They wanted to securely and ethically process an array of clinical, administrative, research, and geotyping data, and they can only exclusively use on-premise infrastructure, but they really still required the high-performance elastic compute and storage that you get from cloud computing vendors, but they needed this guaranteed jurisdictional compliance. Like the data could not flow from one country to another, which was a bit problematic when you consider hyperscale cloud providers and that they can provide, data residency within a country, but not necessarily guarantee that the data won't flow between jurisdictions, especially when those jurisdictions are right beside each other. And so with the Canadian cloud provider, they actually deployed a fully dedicated edge infrastructure stack on the premises of this hospital with remote logging and monitoring and support and things like that. And it brought the workloads as close to the user as possible. And so this enabled the researchers to work much more efficiently with the ability to get this secure and elastic infrastructure as a service while meeting their very strict compliance needs that they had. And so this is a really great example of the private edge infrastructure deployments that we talked about, where there's going to be these dedicated infrastructure stacks that are running really close to where the users are. And I think it's going to be a much more common deployment model that we're going to see in highly regulated industries that require data sovereignty.
Great. Well, thank you all very much for sharing all of those things, because I think there's great overview of what's going on and some use cases. And we did get a question at the very beginning saying, could you guys please share some use cases that are going on in the real world? So I think that we've at least hopefully answered that first question already. So I want to put a question to both Dahlia and Madison. It's one that we've talked about ourselves, but also that we've got from our listeners as well, is when telcos are partnering or bringing these solutions to market, when they're partnering with somebody to bring these solutions to market, who's the lead? Who owns that customer relationship? So that's a question we have from the audience. And what I would add on to that is, you know, what are the pros and cons of the telco allowing someone else to front that relationship? And maybe Madison, you can start us off a little bit, since you just gave some key use cases there. You know, was the telco the lead seller on any of those, or how did they participate in that?
Yeah, so we didn't have a telco lead off on these types of use cases. We actually worked with a regional Canadian cloud provider on it, but it very well could have been a telco to solve these types of use cases. And I guess what I'd say is, you know, we know that telcos have historically struggled with providing, you know, really compelling front-facing user interfaces and user experiences. And I think to a large part, the incumbent vendors that they've worked with haven't been able to enable the type of ecosystem of innovation that the telcos truly require to own their destiny and bring forward this branded, consistent, normalized experience where they can offer their customers both the choice of hyperscale cloud providers and the differentiation of the telco grade services they're offering. And so I definitely think there's a lot of room for telcos to be able to step in and deliver this. I mean, the next generation of applications is going to require multiple vendors, highly reliable, distributed and connected edge to cloud infrastructure. And with the right training and enablement, we've seen telecoms start on the journey of evolving from like reselling bespoke products where they used to say, you know, I want to deliver X use case, so I choose X vendor and I'm done. But being the best place to consume X vendor is, you know, a pretty lousy and undifferentiated value proposition. And so we've seen them through a lot of this training and enablement that we've done with our telco partners begin to really look at selling solutions that are tied to their customers' business outcomes and that included a collection of products and services across the edge to cloud and connectivity portfolio that they did front. What are your thoughts about that, Dalia?
Yeah, you're on the other side for me, but anyway, yeah, so I would agree. I think in most cases, the telcos do want to maintain the front relationship with the customer, and you know, I guess it's part of this ambition to be relevant. They not necessarily that they want to be at the center of the ecosystem, but definitely want to be this, you know, as Miriam was saying, the kind of the one-stop shop type provider. And in most cases, well, not in most cases. So I think what we heard was, you know, that's easier when the telco is an incumbent. For example, within a particular country, has a strong enterprise relationship. Some telcos were thinking about, you know, how do we extend what we can do around edge, say in our home market, to some of our other operating countries, for example. And that's where it becomes a bit more challenging, especially I think when those operations, say for example, are primarily mobile businesses, where the nature, you know, the kind of the go-to-market is quite different. The relationship with enterprises is also quite different. And so there's a little bit that needs to change to be able to position themselves as that kind of solution provider. But yeah, and the other thing I would say is I would agree with Madison. I don't think necessarily that telcos have a challenge in sort of going to enterprises, providing solutions, but in the past, it's been about maybe meeting expectations and delivering service and solutions that, you know, are kind of outside of their core competency, but are also in line with competitors. And that's, I think, where there's a change in the market where, you know, maybe say 5 to 10 years ago, telcos are probably a little bit more, you know, would want to do things more themselves. I think what we heard, there's much more openness to work with partners to ensure that those services are, you know, of a certain standard, but also they can still fund that relationship with the customer.
Thanks, guys. And I think that this leads really into the next big topic, which will be no surprise, the relationship with the hyperscalers. We're getting lots of questions about that one. So I think that I'll start off very quickly with a quick one for Miriam. When you were setting the scene for us beforehand, I've got a question from the outside, from the audience, who are saying a lot of the sort of strategies that you've seen, that you've outlined in the conversations we had, were very offensive. Have you seen anyone who's taking a more defensive tack when they're thinking about edge? They're just kind of thinking, I just have to do something so I don't lose out completely to the hyperscalers. Is that something that you came across in the research?
Marianne, I think you're on mute.
Yeah. It's interesting because definitely a lot of the telcos that we're speaking to clearly are feeling threatened by the hyperscalers, and especially after Microsoft's acquisition of Affirmed and Metaswitch, there is a lot of talk about, we're worried that the hyperscalers are trying to come in and, take our grounds. So I do think that the telcos definitely are feeling threatened, but I think of the ones we spoke to, I don't know, maybe if it was just them wanting to pitch it as, oh, this is our plan, this is our strategy, as opposed to, oh, we're scared, so we're going to do this. So maybe they are feeling that, but in the conversations they had with us, they pitched it less so that as a defensive move, and they did definitely, highlight that it was more of a strategic thing for them. But I do think that's a good point, and I'm sure there are a lot of telcos that are considering that in their thoughts with regards to edge, that they do actually have to do it as quite a defensive move.
And building on that, thinking about the edge infrastructure play that telcos could potentially do, having a lot of infrastructure in their local markets. Obviously, a lot of the hyperscalers are doubling down with their localized plays, whether that's wavelength or outposts or all of the more localized things that the hyperscalers are bringing to market. Is it realistic for telcos to think that they could play a role here, and how should they manage that, carving out that role for themselves in the ecosystem going forward?
Yeah, I think I can take that one. I think this is generally, and there are differences in opinion. I think there are some telecoms operators who want to be that edge platform provider, and that's maybe to compete head on with the hyperscalers, or it might be to find a sort of a proposition that is different to what the hyperscalers offer, whether it's it could be about targeting certain customers, certain industries, focusing on certain maybe benefits or angles, say around like data sovereignty, for just as one example. But generally speaking, I think there's so much uncertainty still in edge computing, and it's so early, and there are so many different flavors of edge. We've kind of generalized it as on-prem edge and network edge, but there is also the device edge. At the on-prem edge, there are various different form factors. You have regional edge data centers, which are to some degree outside of the telco operator's domain, and so I think a lot of telcos are taking a realistic approach in that it's not either or. We don't just partner with hyperscalers, or we do. It's, in some cases it makes sense because, like we said, edge is an extension of the cloud in many cases, and there are customers already using those, whether it's AWS, Google, Microsoft, whoever it might be, using those tools. Easy for them to extend and distribute their workloads to the hyperscalers edge. In other cases, the customers aren't using the public cloud. So it really depends. And I guess there is this move to be more open. And you've probably seen in the last couple of weeks that some large telcos have partnered with, network equipment providers and with hyperscalers in similar domains. And that will, I think, happen across the piece.
Thank you. So now I want to move a little bit to the sort of commercial and demand side of things. So one of the things that you guys mentioned during your presentation was this challenge of the chicken and egg, where telcos are waiting for commercial scale for adoption, but enterprises aren't going to adopt until things are more mature. And one of the questions that I also have from the audience is, how do telcos think about the cost control when they're doing this, right? Because it's a great idea, let's build out a bunch of edge data centers, but if usage is really low, can they really, justify the ROI on that yet when the market isn't there? So I don't know, Madison, if you want to kick us off on your thoughts about how to address that dilemma.
Yeah, absolutely. So there's definitely a lot of ways that telecoms and enterprise users can and probably will do to stimulate the adoption of edge computing. I mean, when we think about the growth of the edge, it's really driven by this ability to process data a lot closer to the user, so that the information that's collected and distributed is going to travel a lot shorter distances compared to data that could be stored in like a centralized cloud provider. And so like any entity, when data takes less time to travel and it's a very large amount of data, you can really help optimize for your end customers the management and processing of these high volumes of data, which means that your end customer is going to save time and make decisions at a much quicker pace. And what we're seeing from our market, at least, is that many businesses are starting to view their data as infrastructure. So they're building out these IT frameworks that define how they're going to capture, manage, and use the data. And as organizations are better classifying the data, I think it's becoming clear that there are optimal places for that data to run, whether it's in a hyperscale cloud provider, whether it's on-premise, or whether it's at the edge. And if I look back to kind of the use cases I was highlighting earlier around some of the early adoption of localized and edge computing, they were always tied to a particular business need. It wasn't that we invested a whole bunch in building out all this edge infrastructure and then we waited for the customer to come. No, it was just through engaging our customers and understanding these mission critical problems that are impacting their operations. And those in and of itself created the urgency to solve the problem. And I think they're going to be willing to move forward as long as they're confident in the proposed solution. And so there's definitely a lot a telecom can do in terms of offering an integrated approach where their edge infrastructure is going to be, connected with the hyperscale cloud infrastructure. And we've seen for a lot of the early adopters, they don't want to learn a whole new platform. It's already been a challenge to figure out what workload should run on a private cloud, what should run on a public cloud. And with the introduction of Edge, I think it's highlighting the importance of telecoms and their partners to be able to offer a kind of fully managed solutions, at least in the beginning of the initial early adopters, or at least some way where they can, augment their operations team to ensure that they not only solve that mission critical problem today, but they also put their customers on the path for long-term operational success.
So we've got 3 minutes left, and I'm going to put this sort of a follow-on from the last question to Dalia and Miran. So kind of, what Madison is talking about is you build to a use case, to a commercial need or a client need that already exists. And one of the audience has asked us, okay, so would it be possible to think of some kind of combination of on-premise and off-premise? Do you see some kind of like way that telcos could kind of address both of those markets, or an on-premise strategy could kind of grow into an off-premise network edge solution as well at the same time? So I wonder if you guys, give us a couple of comments on that before, as we round up this webinar.
Yeah, I can start. I think it's very much tied to the previous question, because I totally agree with what Madison's saying, that you take a business need and you build for it, but then that is scalable. I think one of the key things though will be the underlying technology, and to as I sort of said in my presentation, use cloud, say whether it's open source or at least cloud native technologies to underpin that, because then it doesn't really matter if the application needs to work on the cloud or at the network edge or the on-prem edge. It should be easy for customers to move those workloads. And we are probably at least a couple of years away from truly dynamic orchestration of workloads across different edges, but having that underlying platform at least makes it easy for say manual migration or orchestration of workloads. So I think that will be key. And then as long as that foundation is in place, it's not going to be a sort of a huge jump for developers to leverage the network edge if and when it's ready. And maybe in some cases that they are using, they might be using, say, network technology at the moment, whether, I don't know, maybe it's Wi-Fi or 4G. When 5G is available, it may make sense to move to a 5G network edge. And again, so having that kind of, as I say, that technology foundation makes it much easier to make that transition.
All right. So what you're saying is do your hard work now so that you can capitalize on it later. Yeah, and
I think it's also using. Yeah, I mean, maybe luckily I don't have to do that hard work as a lowly consultant / analyst. But yeah, I think it's key. But these are, it's about like industry standards. So we're not asking telcos to invent the wheel. These tools are out there. It's just leveraging them and not trying to create something that's bespoke or proprietary for the sake of, maybe control or whatever it might be.
Well, I think that is a great thing to finish off on. And I know that there are many questions that we didn't get to. Thank you everyone for your questions. We really appreciate them. And Dahlia and Madison and Miran will take a look at these and actually prepare a Q&A document. So you will get answers. They'll just be in written format in the next, probably it'll take us a week or so to turn that around. So with that, thank you very much to everyone for joining this webinar. Thank you, Madison, Dahlia, and Miran. And we'll let everyone continue with their day.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks for tuning in. Bye-bye.
Thank you.